Anybody who denies that there isn't systemic bias just isn't paying attention. That's all there is to it. And we know it as judges. We know it as attorneys.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. Today on the show, we have retired Superior Court Judge Michael Wolverton. Judge Wolverton grew up in Mankato, Minnesota, in a family of educators, and had planned to be a teacher himself. But when he got to student teaching, he realized it just wasn't the path for him. We discuss his early years as a public defender in Anchorage, how he started the Palmer Public Defender Office, and what his 38 years on the bench were like. Judge Michael Wolverton, welcome so much to the podcast.
It's nice to be here. Thank you for asking.
You graduated from law school in 1977?
Correct.
And how did you make it from there to Alaska, or how did that come about?
I took the classic triangle route. I joined Peace Corp, and 3 weeks after I graduated from law school, I was in the Truck Lagoon, now called Chuk, as a Peace Corps public defender. And then I ended up spending most of my time on the island of Saipan as a Peace Corps public defender, which was an outstanding experience. I traveled all over Micronesia and Papua New Guinea and Nauru, etc.
Was it because that was something that you'd always wanted to do, was travel, or I mean...
I always wanted to commit myself to public service. Mm-hmm. You know,
whether as a teacher, as a lawyer.
Whatever it was, and especially at the outset of my graduating from law school, that's exactly what I wanted to do.
So I don't know anything about that. So the Peace Corps employs public defenders who get assigned to these exotic locales. Is that sometimes?
Yeah. Well, that was for some time before that. Peace Corps specifically did not want lawyers because they caused too much trouble. I was told. But my friend and mentor, Herb Soule, who had been chief public defender in Alaska previously, was the chief public defender out there. And by the way, he just passed last Wednesday.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
85 years old and lived a great life. But he was my friend and mentor out there and really informed. Every decision I've ever made as a lawyer and judge was informed by his training. Herb's good friend was retired Judge Victor D. Carlson, who still lives here. And he was a Superior Court judge. He came out for a visit, and Herb introduced us. And he offered me a job as his law clerk. Well, as a Peace Corps volunteer, I was making $195 every 3 months.
Wow.
And so he was giving me a job where I was getting paid money and benefits. You know, I thought, wow, you know. So I always make the joke, like so many Alaskans make. I landed here January 4, 1980 on a 1-year contract, and I'm still here.
Wow. And so you came for that clerkship.
I did.
With Judge Carlson. And
I was here I clerked for him for 6 months, and then I was told that there were positions opening at the Public Defender Agency here. I asked Vic if I could apply, and he said absolutely. So I went over, and a week later I was with the Alaska Public Defender Agency, and I spent 3 years there.
Tell us about that. What was it like being a public defender in the early 80s?
Like taking a drink of water from a fire hose. And that's the best description I've ever heard. I mean, I started doing city misdemeanors with my dear friends John Salemi and Rich Sonnheiser. We all taught each other a lot, but we had 175 open cases each.
Wow.
I mean, we were down there 6 days a week and 7 nights probably. I mean, just nonstop.
Are there any cases that you remember from that period that made an impact on you?
I could probably name some, but I think it was more the volume. I mean, I won my first 2 jury trials I ever tried, and I thought, wow, this is really great. And then shortly thereafter, in 1 week, I lost 4 separate jury trials in 1 week.
Wow.
Bringing me back to reality. So it was just serving clients, going to the jail, developing a relationship with your clients, managing a huge, busy caseload. That was a lesson there.
So I'm not from a legal family.
Sure.
I have never employed an attorney. I know very little about the law. I think some of my listeners are probably in the same boat.
Sure.
As a public defender, I assume that you have to defend people who might be guilty. My question is kind of like
whoever comes in the door.
Right. Whoever comes in the door.
Yep.
And you do your best to offer them a defense.
Yep.
When you lost those 4 cases in 1 week, I don't know, I just think like the law of percentages.
I wasn't shocked.
Right. Yeah. So sometimes I feel like you probably had the deck stacked against you as far as winning if you had a case where you knew the evidence.
Well, by and large, prosecutors don't bring cases that they don't think they can win and prove beyond a reasonable doubt. That's just the fact of it. So much of what you learn early on is that your job is to help your clients face reality. You do the best to cut their losses. Maybe you can get the charges reduced, and particularly at the misdemeanor level, they weren't facing huge jail time by and large. And maybe you could get them off with a suspended sentence, and whatever you could work out that was the best for them. That was being a good public defender in my book.
I assume you moved up. You didn't just stay with the misdemeanor level.
No, you move up in a hurry. I mean, I'm not saying this is a good thing, but within 24 months, I was on my own trying a first-degree murder case in Anchorage and all kinds of cases.
Did you win that case?
No, but it changed the law in the state of Alaska on an evidentiary issue. And I had no intention. I had no belief that I was going to win the case, but that did change the law to the extent that they had to change the rules of evidence to accommodate the case. But I kept on trying cases one after another, and then went back to Saipan for a brief time. And then Chief Public Defender Dana Fabe called Saipan and asked if I would open the first public defender office in Palmer, Alaska. They had never had an office. They serviced it out of Anchorage. And that was a great experience. I mean, I got to find the office space. I got to establish the relationship with the court system, the legal authorities out there, the prosecutors hired my staff, and I did that for a year, and that was a great experience.
Did you have friends that were prosecutors?
Sure. Yeah.
I guess I just feel like that the philosophical underpinnings of the two groups seem so opposed in a way.
Well, it's interesting because my friend and mentor, Herb Soul, who I just told you about, he and Vic Carlson were the first chief public defenders here in Alaska, but it was a really good learning experience because there wasn't such a thing as a public defender back when they started. So who were the people who knew criminal law, who became public defenders? The former prosecutors.
So tell us a little bit about that. And I know a little bit about this because I know that Alaska, as a territory, outlawed the death penalty.
Right.
My understanding is that there had been 8 executions, that none of them had had proper defense, that there were a lot of issues. I think 6 of them were men of color.
Yeah.
Like there was a lot of issues that just looking at it on paper, you would think this doesn't seem fair.
Right.
And so I'm curious when public defenders became the the rule that you would have an unassigned legal defense that was adequate?
Let's see, 1972, like that.
That seems fairly recent.
It's pretty recent.
Mm-hmm.
And Herb really, Vic Carlson kind of held that job for his friend Herb Soule, who came out of Peace Corp Brazil and really ramped up the office and hired names that are just famous in the legal community to this day. Herb hired virtually all of them, along with Vic, and set the tone for the public defense in Alaska.
So you opened that office in Palmer and got it up and running.
Yes.
Any particular memories from that office?
It was, again, so busy. And finally, my dear friend Peter Ashman came out and assisted me and became a lifelong friend. Later, he became a judge as well. And I had told Dana that I would get the office up and running, but I just decided that I didn't know what I was going to do, but I needed to give myself an end date. So I said, I'll do this for a year. I'll get everything up and running. And I think I'm proud that we established a working relationship with the entire legal community and the court system out there. I hope lasts to this day. That was a good experience, but I was glad I held to that.
Well, one more question about being a public defender. Did you have people that you knew were innocent and lost the case? I mean, did you have...
Yes, and that's the worst.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know, getting into percentages, but like I said, most people who have been charged, and especially if they've been indicted by a grand jury and you've gone through all the pretrial process, the state has a good case or they wouldn't be bringing it. I mean, they don't just bring cases for the fun of it. They've got a limited resource base. So you're not shocked if you do your best and your client is convicted. But the very worst is to represent an innocent person. That's the toughest because it's on you then. You know.
Is there any generalities that you can make about why innocent people can still be convicted of crimes in Alaska?
Yes. Systemic bias. I know that's a hot button phrase these days, but anybody who denies that there isn't systemic bias just isn't paying attention. That's all there is to it. And we know it as judges. We know it as attorneys. We know it through our training and seminars that we have attended. It just is. And a lot of what your job is as a defense attorney is to really explore that in an honest and non-threatening, confrontive way. Just say, give some examples. And, a good one is to say, role reversal. Would you feel the same way about this individual if the individual wasn't a male but was a female? Maybe an older female? Or if the person wasn't native but was a highly educated Hispanic? I mean, you just start giving them different examples, saying, so don't call this person the defendant. My client has a name, and a family and a background, to kind of shove off that bias that we all have. Every one of us.
When did you become a judge?
I was driving home right at the end of that year that I had put the limit on as a public defender. I was driving home from Palmer, and out of the blue, Judge Elaine Andrews, who was an acquaintance and a friend, called out of the blue and said they had a federal grant to hire a pro tem district court judge. Would I be interested? And I just thought, like so much of my life since law school, it's been legitimate escapism. Like I never intended to be a lawyer. I never intended to be a public defender. I never intended to be a judge, but I just thought, well, that'll be interesting. I can do it for a year. And I just took to it like a duck to water. I thought, boy, this is for me.
Given what you just said about recognizing systemic bias, it just sounds like you already had a good mindset to be a judge.
I think so. I think it was superb training. I think it was superb training. A police officer once said to me, he was right around my age when I was a public defender, and he said, people have such a misconception. They think that the police officers are just tied at the hip to prosecutors. But he said, the police are much more like public defenders because we deal with the people in their time of distress, whether they're defendants or not. They said, we're in the same business, and and that was a really good insight. And I think it's always been helpful as a judge because I have a really strong sense of what jail is like. I spent, week in and week out, I spent all my evenings at the jail. That's where my clients were, and I know what it's like for the stress it imposes upon their families. I know the stress that it imposes on victims of crime because I had to deal with them and be thoughtful and considerate of that and mindful of that. And a lot of times the victims were the spouses and significant others of my clients, so it was a real sticky wicket.
That's interesting. So you said you spent so many evenings at the jail. What was like a typical work day like for you? I mean, were you...
A good question. You'd show up at 8 a.m, get ready for trial if you had a trial or other court proceedings. And you'd keep on doing that until court proceedings were hopefully at a close by mid-afternoon. You'd wolf down some food and get down to the jail and spend from about 6 until 10 o'clock when they threw you out. And that was day in and day out. And it was Saturday afternoons and Sunday afternoons. And it was a lot of work.
Sounds like going to become a judge that you would hope that your work-life balance might get a little better.
There's absolutely no question about it. And by it became very clear to me. I was young. I was early 30s, and my friends at the public defender we were all the same age, and we worked hard, but we played hard. I'm not going to lie. But I thought, if I'm ever going to have a family life, it's not going to be as a public defender. Some people do it, and I'm just amazed. But it wasn't going to be me. I remember my daughter's mother, when she knew me at the end of my being a public defender, and then when I became a judge, and she said, someday, Mike, I'm going to sit down and try to explain the difference between you as a public defender and you as a judge. And I said, well, what was it? And she said, basically it was this. We could be at a really nice gathering with really good friends. It might be a nice party. It might be an elegant meal with friends. And you just weren't there because your mind was on your client at the jail and the trial coming up and the motion you had to file. And she was right. Being a judge, I remember I had a judicial colleague, Chris Loyce, who was pro-temming at the same time. She came in at about 6 in the evening when I first started out, and she said, do you notice anything about the courthouse here, Mike? I said, no, what? She said, you and I, the public defenders, are the only ones here. Everybody else is home with their families. And I thought, what a concept.
Do you think a lot of that, you talked a lot about the caseload, the 175 cases, and that there just weren't enough public defenders, that there was too big of a caseload for the people, or is it something more intrinsic in the nature of that particular job?
You are never going to have enough public defenders. I mean, it's the resources, and probably you don't have enough prosecutors either. I mean, there are limited resources, but somebody's got to do the cases, and that's all there is to it. And it was overwhelming, but it was a job that needed to be done, and we did it, to the best of our ability.
So you got offered that first job as a judge.
Yep.
You said yes.
Yep.
What was the biggest challenge as a new judge?
It was this, and I've told new judges this. When you go in and you're sitting on the bench, and let's say you have a trial, and there are all these issues that come up during jury selection and evidentiary questions and quick rulings and this and that and the other thing. You could easily, in a trial, they make 100 decisions. You could be wrong on every one of them, but you just do the best you can. Hopefully you don't do the old joke of flipping a quarter every time, but you get home and you think, I could have been wrong a whole lot of times. You do the best you can and learn from it. That's all there is to it. But that was an amazing thing, how many decisions that you had to make each and every day.
Do you remember your very first case as a judge?
Yeah. I got everybody in the court laughing because Judge Carlson asked me, he said, well, how are you going to open court? I said, what do you mean? He said, what words are you going to say when everybody's standing and waiting for you to tell them to be seated? What are the words you're going to say? So I wrote it out, but then during that trial there was an attorney, and I knew all these young attorneys in district court because like a week before I'd been one of them.
And I assume they all knew this was your first case.
Oh, yeah. And I called one of the attorneys, I called him Your Honor. And there must have been a dozen of my former colleagues, and they burst out laughing so hard. They said, no, you're the Honor. Okay. So.
Is there a different skill set to being a judge as opposed to,
Yep. It's, and I've always said this, there are three things: patience, and patience. Not all people have that. I don't care what your profession, but certainly in the law, not everybody has that. And boy, you've got to bite your tongue and listen. If you feel yourself getting overheated, you get to call a recess and go into your chambers and sit down and have a cup of coffee and chill out.
Do you have a specific example of like when patience would be required? Just like an example of what something that would, where you need to call a recess. Like what's an example of that?
If I felt that an attorney was getting way too wound up and personalizing an issue against opposing counsel or me or somebody in the court staff or a witness, it's time to take a time out. And then make sure that I came in with a plan to ease the situation. And you learn those tactics. You can calm down, but the most important thing is just to take a recess and then come in and without a jury there, just say, look, this can't happen anymore. Let's just talk this over, And that was a good thing to be able to do. I felt good about my ability to do that.
And you said that you'd make 100 decisions in a day. Easy. And you go home at night and wonder if maybe did you ever go home and or sleep on it and the next day say, wow, I really messed that up yesterday?
Yep.
And how do you handle that?
I go in and I tell them, I would take the attorneys in. I'd say, you know what? I made this ruling. I don't feel comfortable with it. I'd say exactly that. I said, I rarely have problems sleeping on, after I've made decisions. I have a problem. This is my problem with it. I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond, and if you need a few days to respond, you can do that in writing. I'll consider it with my law clerk. I'll talk to my judicial colleagues, and I'll reconsider it. That was very controversial amongst some of the older judges who said, don't you ever admit that you made a mistake. And I just thought, that's not the way I was raised.
And did you have mentors who discouraged you from?
I had older judges who I really like and respect, but they just said, make your decision, plow through, and that's what the Court of Appeals and Supreme Court is. But, that's a big bothersome way to handle things when you're pretty sure you were wrong.
Right.
Just own up and say, I made a mistake. There's no shame in that.
Right. Well, I'm thinking, you've got the prosecution and the defense, and if you made a mistake, it benefited one or the other probably.
Sure.
So I wonder did you have one side that would be upset if you sort of reneged on a previous decision? Or
not in that instance.
Okay.
Because I wouldn't say, okay, I'm just changing my,
right.
I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to my nagging concerns, because I think legally and or factually, I think I got it wrong, and I want you to help clarify. That's what you're there for. It's an adversarial system. You're trained attorneys. You have the resources of your offices. I just felt that was the way it was supposed to be handled.
I want to ask a question about the judicial system in Alaska. Just for those of us who don't follow and aren't really, you were District 3?
I was the 3rd Judicial District. I was a district court judge, and I did about 10 years there, and I was presiding judge for about 6 or 7 years of that in the district court.
Got it. And how many districts are there in Alaska?
4.
4. And District 3 is Anchorage?
Yeah, and it's a big one. It goes all the way out to, the Aleutian Islands. And
gotcha. So you were covering rural Alaska as well.
Yeah, from time to time. And I did that as a Superior Court judge. I went to the Superior Court bench in '96, and
you were appointed by Tony Knowles, the governor.
Yes,
and that's how that works. You said it was Elaine Andrews who.
That was the when I was a pro tem judge, and then I became under Governor Steve Cooper. He appointed me to the district court where I served, and then I was appointed by Tony Knowles to the Superior Court. I did 38 years all told.
Wow. You became a Superior Court judge in 1996. Kind of the same question that I had earlier. Was there a different skill set to being a Superior Court judge as to being a district judge?
It's that the cases, the difference is in jurisdiction primarily. And as a district court judge, I got assigned pro tem to do a lot of Superior Court felonies and Superior Court domestic relations. But it's that district court civil jurisdiction is up to $50,000. They do small claims cases up to $10,000. And misdemeanor cases up to a year in jail and $10,000 fine. Superior Court is everything else. The first-degree murder, the horrible sexual assault cases, and all civil jurisdiction, no matter what the dollar value. You do everything, all domestic relations, child custody, all that stuff.
Do you get paid more as a Superior Court judge?
A little bit. A lot of people say it's not. I've told people, I said, if you're a district court judge, don't file to be a Superior Court judge for the pay raise. It's not enough money. I don't know, maybe $1,000 or $1,500 a month.
Yeah,
but that's not why you do it,
right? So why do you do it? Why does one want to go from district to Superior Court judge?
A new challenge. Like I said, I had been doing felonies, and I'd been doing so much Superior Court work all along anyway, that it just made sense for me to do that, and I was really glad that I did that. It was, kind of a different set of issues each time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All rise for the Honorable Judge Spirit of Alaska.
Thank you, members of the court. Today, we have the unfortunate case of a man who would never listen to the East Anchorage Book Club podcast. He is woefully unaware that he could be listening to the voices that make Alaska great. If you want to support our podcast, please recommend it to a family member, a friend, or a colleague. They'll thank you for it, and it'll keep them out of my courtroom. Case dismissed.
What makes Alaska's judicial system special?
The Missouri Plan.
Explain the Missouri Plan.
I guess we're the modified Missouri Plan, but one of the few, and that's this. It's a merit system, so that you don't run for a position against another individual. When a position comes open and you want to apply for that job, you apply through the Judicial Council. They do a very thorough review background check. You submit yourself to an anonymous bar poll, which can be brutal. And I always warn people, make sure that you're seated and ready for that, because it's no holds barred. People will let you have it if they think you deserve it.
And this is being filled out by attorneys who have had cases in your court?
Anybody who's a licensed attorney in the state of Alaska. Anybody and everybody.
So it could be somebody you've never met, somebody who
Absolutely.
have no idea how they know this about you.
Absolutely. Or somebody told somebody, and then they can really let you have it. For each position in district court and at every level, the Judicial Council has to give at least 2 names from all the applicants. They can give more names, but they have to send up at least 2 names. There have been times where they have found that only 1 name was going to be passed on, in which case they had to start the whole process over. There have been a couple cases where they said none of these applicants are qualified. It makes for a really good process, because no governor, regardless of the party, can just say to his crony, "You got the job, buddy, you and me." That's just not the way it works. And in fact, that's almost historically the kiss of death if anybody is that close to the governor. And it just makes for such a good system. I think about this. Vic Fisher, who I'm sure you know of.
Podcast guest 2 times.
Yeah.
The only 2-time podcast guest.
Oh, he's a wonderful guy. But, he was in that Fairbanks Constitutional Convention. We had a judicial conference up there some years back. He was on that group that made that wonderful decision to do this Missouri Plan instead of having judges run against each other. And I just stood up. He was on the dais being interviewed by Judge Carpinetti, and I said, I have a question for every judge in the room. If you had to be applying for a judgeship and this were an elected position running against an opponent, and you had to raise money and run and campaign door to door, how many of you would have applied for a judgeship? I think out of 150 people in the room, I think 4 or 5 hands went up. It's just clear. You get a different type of candidate. I always go back. I told Vic that. I remember way back when Mike Wallace was with 60 Minutes, and they were doing a long piece on elected judges, and they were in Texas. And they were very open, and it was during the election, and they were invited in to judicial applicants' campaign parties, gatherings. Over 80% of the contributors were who? The lawyers that were going to appear in court.
So that the judge would know how much that lawyer had contributed to their campaign.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine such a thing?
No.
Like, you come into court, hey, you and me, Judge, remember my firm and I ponied up $50,000 for you last time. But,
Yeah.
you'll be fair and impartial.
Right.
I mean, give me a break. I mean, they didn't even candy coat it, and they would be asked a question, and they thought, well, what are you talking about? And I remember coming back from judicial college in Reno with my Alaska judges. You'd get off the plane at the airport and kiss the tarmac, so thankful that you
don't have to deal with
you
that.
didn't have to deal with that. It's nonsense.
So speaking of that, judges in Alaska are nonpartisan.
Right.
What does nonpartisan mean or not mean? I mean, are you allowed to have political opinions?
Sure, but you cannot contribute to political campaigns. In fact, you can't even mount a campaign in favor of your retention unless you're attacked. And then you have to have sort of surrogate committee act on your behalf, asking to solicit funds to support any attack. But it can only if you've been attacked.
Did that ever happen to you?
No. But it happened to colleagues. And in this day and age, as people become more politically savvy, what happens? Nobody's going to attack you months in advance of the election. They'll come out when people are finally paying attention, and they'll come out with a vicious attack 10 to 14 days. And then
you don't have time.
If let's say you had $1 million lying around, you couldn't buy the airtime.
Because it'd already be bought up.
It'd be bought up completely. So it's a tough situation.
Now that you're retired, are you still bound to the nonpartisan requirements, or?
I'm still bound by all the judicial canons of ethics, which a lot of that is included in that. I don't have a problem with that. You know, I decided early on, even though I have my strong political views on this issue, that person, the other thing, but I've been registered undeclared for 40 years. And I was glad to do it because nobody should have to come in and say, oh, gee, what's your position on this, Judge?
Right.
You know, do you feel this way I do about that candidate? Or if I thought it were a real problem, I'd probably tell them, but I just have never found it. Never say never, but I can't think of an instance where it ever interfered with my decision.
And why did you decide to retire in 2020?
The Alaska Constitution says at age 70 you turn into a pumpkin. And that's the only reason.
You would have kept going?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it was funny, Vic Fisher talked to us about that. He said he didn't want to be so brutal about it, but he said, in 1958, people didn't live to 70. You know what I mean?
Right.
He said, you were dead.
Right.
So they have probably to this day the most generous judicial retirement system. I mean, if you get 15 years in, you can retire at age 65 with absolute full judicial retirement benefits, which are just wonderful. I just kept on going because I like being a judge.
What was your favorite part about being a judge?
At the risk of sounding corny, I'll just tell you, I got up every morning, and everybody has, their good day and bad day, or good case or bad case, but I looked forward to getting in the car and going to work. It was always a good brain teaser. I liked interacting with court staff. My secretary of 30 years and her husband, they live right around the corner where they raise their 3 kids. I have close, tight relationships with those people. I liked the brain teaser of trying to pick a jury, dealing with younger attorneys especially, and figuring out how to run a trial. I mean, it's impromptu theater every day. I mean, there's a set of rules, the rules of evidence and criminal procedure. Every day is a new day. Every day, every witness is a new witness. It was just a good challenge.
Hey, well, what's funny is I did a little research on you before I came over, and on your 2018 retention questionnaire, that's how you opened. You said, when I wake up in the morning, I truly look forward to going to work.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would change about the Alaska judicial system?
Not really. I mean, I just fear that from time to time there are movements to go away from the way we have it to an elected. And I just think that's a horrible decision for the reasons I've already stated. It's just not a remotely close call. I remember going to judicial college, and there's a really nice instructor there who was a judge from New Orleans. We just had this open discussion with like 100 judges in his class about what the differences are. And somebody asked him, this was 35 years ago, how much money did you have to raise for your last election? He said $1.5 million. And I raised my hand, and I got a big laugh from everybody. I said, you raised $1.5 million to get a job that pays to the penny what my judgeship pays? I mean, think about it.
Right.
$1.5 million, and that was 35 years ago. You don't want judges doing that. So, I mean, that's my biggest fear. And I still stand by the quality of my judicial colleagues. I'll put them up against anybody in our Court of Appeals, our Supreme Court here in Alaska. They're just outstanding people.
So I assume you're a no vote on the Constitutional Convention.
Yeah, probably. But, I mean, I don't mind if they have a convention. I just don't want them to go think, well, and then we're going to change how we pick judges.
Right.
You know, I mean,
but that's the fear, is that would be something they would want to do.
Yeah, I would be there advocating as strongly as I could against that, because I will say, after all these years, I'm very, very proud to say that I'm a member of the Society of Judges who have served the state of Alaska. I'm very proud of that.
Is there any particular case or cases in your entire career that just kind of stick with you when you think of your most memorable moment?
The worst is that cases that are so horrifying I can't even legally discuss. Horrifying sexual abuse of infant children. And I was required to look at photos and videos by the forensic people, because I had to say that I found a legal basis for the charges. But I was prohibited from telling anybody, even my law clerk or my staff, about it. And I wouldn't have done that to them. That's no fair to people. I wouldn't do it to anybody. And those I'll take to my grave. Just horrifying stuff.
Get close to the end on a happier note. Any supreme happy moments from your career?
Sure. You know, I always said the very best thing you can ever do as a judge is adoption and naturalized citizens. But to preside over an adoption, man, it just doesn't get better than that.
And did you preside over a lot of adoptions?
Sure. Yeah, I look forward to that, you know, and people adopting tragically handicapped children and giving them a home. Jeepers creepers. And you could see the smiles on everybody's faces, and I knew this child who had no hope otherwise is going to have a home forever. You know, that's a great experience.
Well, thank you so much, Judge Wolverton. The last question we ask of all of our guests is to recommend a book to our listeners. Do you have a book you can recommend?
I was trying to think if I have a book about the law, and I don't. I mean, I have my English major book.
Oh, yeah. Give us an English major book.
Moby Dick.
Moby Dick?
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, I was a Hawthorne Melville guy. Somebody asked me that many, many years ago. I think it was kind of a life changer, because as an English major, I took well over a year to read that book.
Yeah, it's a big book.
Yeah, and when people asked me why, I said it took him over a year to write it. I had to expend the same amount of time reading it and digesting it. And it is rich in every way in every way. It's just a great American novel in my view.
Have you read it more than once?
Twice.
Twice?
Yeah. But it's well
Marked.
yeah.
Well, thanks again so much for coming on the show today. It's been really interesting. I'm really grateful for you being here today.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Corey Coolidge for making this podcast listenable, and thank you to you, our listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. Next week on the podcast, we have author K.L. Marshall discussing her 2021 book, Faith and Oil: How the Alaska Pipeline Shaped America's Religious Right. Please tune in.